Hello guys, it's Ryan Ho back with another video. Today I want to talk about the Hidizs MD4. Now this IEM is really amazing because it's a tunable IEM with 4 sound profiles. So I have these little switches on the back that you can basically use the included tip to change, and you can change it to 4 different sounds. And on top of that, it also has 3 different tips that it comes with. So really you have 12 different sounds that you can achieve using all the customization that it comes. So this really has a tuning that can fit multiple people. So I'm going to tell you the combination I use the most that I think is the best, which for me, it was the balance with the warm mode, and we'll talk about how that one sounds because I thought that was the best in that mode. Honestly, the sound was really good. It's like exactly what I'm looking for in an IEM. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to do some comparisons to some other products as well, like the Moondrop Blessing 2 and the New Titan S. So they also has 4 BA drivers, which is 4 balance armature drivers. And these drivers typically have a lot more detail than the typical dynamic driver. And you can definitely tell that, like, when I compare these to like cheaper IEMs that have only dynamic drivers, these sound a lot more detailed than those. So we're going to talk about that as well. So the technology definitely is something that kind of plays into the sound. Of course, I want to thank Hidizs for sending this out for me to review. They actually want to send me one that was like an $80 one that was like not as cool as this one, but I told them to send me out this one because this one had these cool switch features that I really wanted to talk about for you guys. Anyways, let's get into details. All right, let's unbox the Hidizs MD4. We get nice IEMs on top. Typical presentation. Ooh, they actually look really nice with the kind of shiny tops. All right, so we got these out. They actually have the tips pre-installed, which is really cool. Wow, that looks real nice actually. Damn, I like the way they look already. So we have a bunch of tips that it comes with. I like how they're kind of labeled nice. Vocal ear tips, balance ear tips, and bass ear tips. Well, I'm probably gonna go for the bass one, if you know what I'm saying, but I guess they got the balance ones installed. They also have a earphone cleaning brush. I like how it's nicely labeled. I don't feel like that never really happens. And then we have a nice little box under. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the case. So the case of this is this nice kind of brown leather. The feeling of the case is just really nice and premium feeling. It's nice and soft and plushy, as well as it does feel like tight and flush against the case. You can see that texture on it too. So I'm not sure if it's like genuine leather or just like fake leather, but it feels really nice and it looks really nice in my opinion. So yeah, this case is definitely really fancy, and then it even comes with this little kind of pouch inside as well. So definitely like this case. It's probably one of the nicer cases I've ever gotten, honestly. All right, so here we have the cable. It's a 3.5 millimeter, and then it's a braided cable. And yeah, this is what it looks like. All right, so let's take a look at the Hidizs MD4. So you can see this shell is this nice like gold kind of accent around this kind of, I guess, acrylic shell. It's really cool to see how it has that texture in there. And it looks really nice with this kind of logo printed on it. I feel like it gives it a really nice, classy, like jewelry type of look to it. And I feel like it stands out to me. Like, it just looks so cool, in my opinion. It's just like, I feel like every face also probably looks a little different because of the way it's designed. But I just like the way it kind of shines out and it kind of reflects. Now, the actual shape of this IEM in my ear, I noticed that it's not that big. So like there's other ones like the Moondrop ones that I've tried that are taking a significant space in my ear. This one, it feels nice and smaller and fits much more comfy in my ear. So I do prefer the size of this, and I also felt like the tip right here as well wasn't as thick. So overall, the actual experience of it in my ear was much more pleasant than other ones that are a little bit bigger than this one. And I just found it a little bit more comfortable. Now here we can see the switches, right? So we have the tunable switches. So there's the 1 and the 2 that you can turn on and off, essentially, or up and down. And I have the kind of pamphlet over here. So over here, there's a pamphlet of basically telling you what each switch does when it's in each position. So, you know, there's the balance, the warm, the treble, and the bass. in my opinion, the best modes are definitely the warm mode and the treble mode. I find these have the most natural kind of presentation in the music, in my opinion. The kind of the mid-range of the warm and the treble are much more present than the balance and the bass. I feel like the balance and the bass really pushes back the mid-range a little bit and makes it kind of sound a little bit more distant, in my opinion. So your vocals sound a little bit further away. So I personally prefer using the warm and the treble. And between the warm and the treble, I do like the warm the best, in my opinion. So that's the tuning that I kind of chose to stick with most of the time. And, you know, the bass one definitely, depending on the tip that you put it in, the bass mode sounds sometimes a little like too much, or it sounds like it was like a little bit closed in sometimes on certain tips. While the balance mode, it sounds very interesting because like in certain tips, it also sounds like kind of uneven, the sub bass and the bass. So the balance mode never really did it for me either, the way the warm did. And the treble mode, I would say in general, does sound a little bit more trebly than the warm, as you know, it's defined. And I feel like if people who like bright will like the treble mode, versus people who don't like too much kind of treble above, I guess like 8,000, would probably like the warm better, in my opinion. So it really depends on the person, but you know, I'm gonna recommend the warm. So then here are all the tips that you also get in addition to those different tunings, right? So as you can see, I'm currently using the balance tips, so they're gone, but the vocal tips, and there's also a bass tip. So in my opinion, the bass tip sounds the most kind of like, I guess like mid-range forward, and it sounded a little bit uneven, but the first time I heard it, I thought it sounded a lot more detailed in certain areas of the music that I wasn't really used to, which is kind of like, I guess the upper mid-range was kind of boosted a lot with the bass ear tips. And I thought that was an interesting sound, but ultimately I kind of gravitated for the balance because that sounded much more even and much more natural sounding, in my opinion. But if you were looking for the bass tips, those definitely have that quality. And even though they say it's like bass, I feel like the bass of it was like enhanced, but for me, I was more focused on the mid-range sounding a little bit more wonky than the balance tips. The vocal ear tips also have a little bit the same kind of upper mid-range kind of enhancement that the bass ear tips do, but to a lesser degree. So I feel like the vocal ear tips do definitely kind of enhance that region as well. So, you know, personally, I'm going to recommend people use the balance tips. I think these sound the best, and it's not really close in my opinion. Like this sounds the most balanced really, while these two sound a little bit more uneven in my opinion. So let's talk about the cable. So the cable is this braided cable that also comes with a loop right here. It terminates into a 3.5 millimeter, so a standard cable. It feels really lightweight, so I really like the cable in that sense. I don't really like those thick and like not very malleable and heavy cables, so I feel like this is the type of cable I like, one that really kind of flexible as well as lightweight. All right, so let's talk about everyone's favorite thing, which is sound. So for the Hidizs, I would say in my favorite configuration, which is the balance warm mode, this thing sounds honestly kind of like what it sounds like, balanced and warm. So when you talk about the bass going down low, the sub bass I would say is pretty flat. There's definitely not an emphasis there at all. I would say the sub bass, you know, could use a little bit more emphasis in my opinion. And then when it comes to kind of the bass, it's really good. I would say it's also like slightly elevated in the bass. It's not really anything too crazy. So I think if you're an audiophile, you'll like the bass. And if you're like a bass head, you probably want a little bit more than that. So I think it's the perfect kind of balanced bass. And then when it comes to kind of like the bass as well, I would say I would define this bass as a BA bass. So what does that mean? So because these has BA drivers, they're kind of smaller drivers, so they don't have the same like impactful feel as like a bigger driver would. So like other, you know, headphones that have those like 10 millimeter dynamic drivers, they tend to punch a little bit harder. In doing my comparisons against like the Dunu Titan S, which has a dynamic driver, and then as well as the competitor, which is like, you know, 2 times more expensive, the Moondrop Blessing 2, which also has BA driver and a dynamic driver, I found the Hidizs bass to be honestly more detailed than both of them. The Hidizs is like a lot more kind of detail oriented, and it even has a pretty good impact. I would say its only thing is like it just sounds small, right? Like a bigger driver will have this more feeling of like a bigger sound stage and more presence in the bass. But besides that, honestly, I feel like the bass on this is better than both of them because it has a higher quality bass than both of them, and it sounds more detailed in my opinion. So that's the thing I think I like about the Hidizs bass. And the only thing that really sounded better than this was the Moondrop Variations at like $500. So for me, the bass of this is really good and more than adequate. Now, when it comes to the mid-range, I would say this is definitely a mid-range focused earphone. The mid-range sounds like really good. It sounds even better, in my opinion, than the Moondrop Blessing 2 because it focuses more in that area. And I find the vocals to be really kind of mid-forward, even more than most of my headphones and earphones I've ever heard. And I kind of appreciate that sound quality about it as well. Now, I think some people might think it's shouty. For me, I don't really find it shouty. I find it just nicely mid-forward, and I really enjoy that characteristic about this. And that's the part where it does really, really well. And then to round that off, when you go up to the treble, I feel like here, when it goes to the kind of the upper treble, I would say it doesn't have that much of that in the warm mode, which is the one I preferred. I typically like my treble not being way too much because it just sounds over sharpened and stuff. If you like that type of characteristic, you can try the kind of the treble mode, but even the treble mode didn't really sound too sibilant. So I feel like the treble mode is definitely there for people who like a little bit lighter. But for me, in the warm mode, this sounds exactly like where I want it. Maybe I could use just a little bit more in like the 8,000 kilohertz to kind of just round it off a little bit. It's this nice kind of non-fatiguing feeling about it, and you get all the detail too. When it comes to kind of comparisons to the Moondrop Blessing 2, I would say the Moondrop Blessing 2 has a little bit more treble presence, but it gets very in C, if that makes any sense. Like there's a lot of over sharpened S's and T's that are very uncomfortable to hear. So while it might sometimes sound more detailed in the area, I find it overall more annoying on the Blessing 2, where I would rather listen to the Hidizs MD4 all the time because it doesn't sound unnatural and over sharpened like this one does. So overall, if I had to summarize the sound, I would say it has this kind of vocal mid-range focus sound. I mean, I guess you could call it kind of an HD 600 of little earphones, I guess, because it really is this kind of mid-forward sound without any of the treble harshness that you can just sit there, relax, enjoy, and listen to it all day long. I feel like that's the type of sound that I gravitate towards, which is, of course, that warm type of sound. So for me, this sound is really lovely. I think basically any person will like this type of sound because it's very inoffensive and very comfortable to listen to for long periods of time. This definitely gets my recommend. Of course, my review wouldn't be complete without talking about soundstage and imaging, right? So soundstage and imaging is an interesting thing, as always. When it comes to kind of the soundstage, I would say the soundstage of this is an earphone. Like it's not gonna sound big, wide, but it sounds like just around you in your ear, you know, like it's not really that different from most IEMs for me. So not something that really stand out. But when it came to imaging, so I played games on this, and it's really interesting because like imaging is the thing where it kind of depends on the tuning of the Hidizs. So like the interesting thing is like when I had this in the different modes, so if you recall, there's the 4 different modes, right? When I had this in kind of the bass mode, or the balance mode, it didn't have that much of that kind of mid-range presence. And because of that, when I was playing games, I found it a little harder to like hear the footsteps and localize my enemies. But then when I kind of changed it to more of the warm mode, which kind of emphasized that mid-range a little bit more, I found the imaging to be much more precise. And I don't know if that's weird, like imaging probably shouldn't be due to like the frequency, but I felt like during at least gaming for me, when I had it in the warm mode, it had the best kind of accuracy for me, and I found it really easy to tell where the enemies were. When it came to like imaging and having a center image, I would say it's pretty centered. I would say maybe it's off by a few degrees. Like if something's like in front of you, it'd be maybe like sound like it's over here instead of like directly in front of you, but that to me is more than adequate. Most things are like that unless they're kind of like, you know, an imaging monster. So in my conclusion, I definitely recommend the MD4. I think these are really, really detailed. They're really cool in the sense of the fact that you can use the switches to kind of tune these. I also think the shell looks really, really nice. Like if I just looked at the shell by itself, it looks like a really high-end IEM, and I think it looks really nice too. So for me, the sound quality that you get out of this is definitely a win, and I think a lot of people really like this for its price, especially for its kind of cool, unique feature of, you know, having a lot of different tunings, 12 different tunings to be, you know, sure. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe down below. It helps my videos out. And if you guys are curious about other IEMs, I did, you know, review the Moondrop Kato. That's around the same price for 170. I also did the Moondrop Variations, which is my favorite IEM as well. So you guys can check those videos out. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.